Hello, everyone. I am your host, Ken Drew, and I am joined by my friend from Between the Liars, Ryan.
How you doing,
Ryan,
Ken?
happy New Year to you,
Happy
sir.
New Year to you as well.
Wow, how long has it been?
Been a minute. I basically took all of last semester off, adjusting to life.
Yes, you did, and I decided to go ahead and focus on family and friends for the holidays anyway. So it's been a wonderful break to say the least.
Yeah,
So I've missed it though.
me too. Kind of. It was nice not have as much to do, but I've missed honestly all of it except for editing and preparing for the show.
Well, the good news is with blueprints, that's pretty much my burden. So you're
Correct.
pretty much just here for the ride. So
Except except for you being John Jay over here writing out the the last little bit of our Constitution.
hey, listen, all right. I appreciate everything you've done so far. So um with that said, folks, we're gonna have pretty much this is a brand new episode. It's pretty much been a minute since we actually done an episode period. So I imagine there's going to be people who may tune in and have never heard of us or never seen us before, or even maybe they have, but they just never really got into the Blueprint series. So let's go ahead and talk about real quickly what Blueprint is and why we think it's important. Ryan, you want to go ahead and give your perspective, like what Blueprint is?
Sure. So at least for me, the idea was a way for us to try and return to small government. And there tends to be a lot of griping done on the conservative side of the aisle, but not a lot of proposals as to how we can have like an active change in the government. So I think, at least for me, Blueprint was a way for us to propose what a small government that will hopefully stay within the parameters that we set might look like. It's more of a thought experiment than anything else, just to kind of go back and forth on, because there's a wide spectrum as to what people think a government should be like. I mean, even if you're on the same side of the aisle, right? We had a lot of disagreements over the course of this entire mini series, and the first portion that we did was just dealing with the three major branches of government. You have the executive, you have the judicial, and then you have the congressional or legislative branches. And I think in the future we're going to deal with a few like loose ends, but we really wanted to tackle what would it look like? What do we see as the main issues, if you will, weaknesses, tendencies of the existing government structure, and what might we do to change that?
Well, I remember when I first came to with the idea originally, and my original idea behind Blueprint was really because for me, I always felt as though conservatives, we do a lot of complaining about big government, but we never come up with solutions as far as how to actually shrink the size, especially when it comes to the 21st century. Our government is so big, it's hard to really imagine how we can actually shrink the size of government and actually come up with the idea of smaller government. So I figured, well, why don't we actually create a series where we lay out a blueprint for conservatives and liberals, if they want to like see what conservatives mean when we say smaller government, for conservatives or just the average American to look into and see, okay, maybe they won't necessarily agree with all of our ideas as far as shrinking the size of government, but at least they have a better foundation as far as like where to go, how we can better our government to serve the people. So that was really my idea behind Blueprint. And I would say it's been a fun process to throw ideas out there, kind of like you were saying. It's a thought experiment more than anything. And it's really idealistic, which that's something Ryan and I want to emphasize. It's just an idealistic, perfect world scenario. um, we did our best, though, as far as trying to come up with ideas that we could curtail that power, give the power back to the people in the state, and also um, really just create a system back to where it's the people, whereas the government working for the people, not the other way around. Which I think out of all the three branches, I think I've enjoyed the most so far. I think I've enjoyed our discussions with Congress, which that's gonna be the first thing we'll go through when it comes to
Yeah,
ratification
we got it.
process.
We gutted Congress. That's that was what we did to that.
Yeah, and so for tonight, actually what we're going to do is we're going to go through the three branches of government again, and we're just going to take it like proposition by proposition. And Ryan and I are just going to say, we like what we have, we're going to stick with it, and then move on from there. If there's something that we originally agreed, and now we kind of are rethinking our original positions, we may go ahead and try to like renegotiate. And if we can't reach a conclusion or a deal per se, we'll just cut that out completely and move on. But you, the audience, you can let us know in the comment section. I'll create a poll as far as, do you agree with the ratifications? What changes would you make? Or what parts did you like? What you didn't like? Let us know in the comment section, which, by the way, folks, make sure to hit the like button, hit the share button, and the subscribe button for our own ego. We would like to get to a point one day, of course, where we can actually, be monetized, but that's beside the point. But anyways, that's really the point of tonight, which, why do you think, Ryan, having a series like Blueprint is so important for the average Joe or Jane to really at least be somewhat interested in?
Like from their perspective, or from like which perspective are you asking for? Sorry.
I'm just asking, like, if you're trying to persuade someone, like, why someone should like care about a series like Blueprint, like, what would be your pitch to them?
I would say regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, whether you believe in bigger government, smaller government, or just chunks of what we've talked about, or none at all, I think that there is value to be had in airing out the issues. And I think that I'm in particular very good at pointing out issues. I think the struggle, like you had mentioned, comes when you're trying to propose an issue. So this is our attempt to do that. And I think to answer that and to preface this entire thing, what we're proposing now is what we've hashed out. However, might come to light later on down the road once this was, theoretically executed, that something was not foreseen as becoming an issue, becomes an issue later on, or something that maybe we hadn't thought about, just having it been the two of us for the most part debating this back and forth. So if you want to be a part of that discussion and comment below or message us directly as to things that you think, like, hey, I think that this might become a problem later on down the road. Like the founding fathers did not set a budget limit, like capping salaries for our congressional members. I don't think they ever thought that there would be career politicians, so they didn't see that as something that needed to be done. And yet here we are. So this is kind of a pushback, if you will, a response, revisions to what we currently have. And I think that that's important to sit through, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with what people are saying, because I think that there's value in the discourse itself. So that'd be my pitch.
And my pitch would be that it's very easy to get into the status quo and literally, as we talked about a moment ago, just kind of complain about the problems, which that's a lot easier to do than actually having to sit down and think, okay, I don't like what we see, or I don't like what I see. What can I do, or what ideas do I have that we can possibly do to create a better and more efficient government, as you say, to better serve the people? And so if you're someone that is kind of tired of that, negativity per se, and you want someone to actually like comes up with it, want a series where it talks about how we can fix the government, propose solutions to at least take it with a grain of salt, if anything. Like we talked about, you're probably not going to agree with everything we say. I know you're not going to agree with everything we say, but at least it gives you an idea, a foundation, a springboard, if you will, so you can actually like use those ideas. And if you think you have a better idea and kind of twist it around to maybe, make it more efficient, then like Ryan said, comment down below or directly message us. But I'm looking forward to the ratification process because it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it has been. So I'm gonna, if we're ready to get into it, I'm gonna pull this up so that if you're watching our live stream or you watch on our streaming platforms, you can read along. I'm a visual person. I like to see where things are going. So we'll just scroll through this together. So we're gonna go point by point. If we agree to it, we're gonna do a little checky box like this, and it crosses it out. That's all I got for Google Docs. I wish I didn't cross it out, but focus on the check mark. So Proposition 1, we're going to start with Congress. Proposition 1 is they will be limited to 20 years total of service. Ken, you keep going back to this idea of returning the power to the people. It is a service. And I think that that's kind of what we're highlighting here. We talked about how if you want to serve 2 terms as president one day, that's your goal, you cannot exceed 16 years before that. So that was our big limitation there, was 20 years of total service.
Well, not only that, but the idea behind it also was that we wanted to go ahead and pretty much create, kind of like bring the two worlds together from the founding fathers' perspective as far as why they didn't want term limits to begin with in Congress, because they believed that experience did matter. And so we wanted to honor that original thought. And we went ahead and said, you know what, let's go ahead and honor that thought, but let's still cap it into where they only serve for a certain amount of time. If they want to serve like 6 years in the Senate and 10 years in the House or something like that, they have that 20-year cap to do it under, but they can't be career politicians. So at least, like you said, it's kind of like the best of both worlds. And so yep. I'm personally still okay with the 20-year total.
Yep. And the big thing with this is incumbents, or the people who are running for re-election, tend to have an advantage, right? You might hate the politician, dislike them, be lukewarm towards them, but the fact that you have name recognition for them tends to make them harder to defeat. It also means that they tend to have more funding. So part of the other reason of capping this was we're hoping that we'll continue to get fresh perspectives in there. I'm not a huge proponent of change for the sake of change, but I also think 20 years is more than enough time to do whatever you needed to do. And if you can't finish what you're trying to do within 20 years, then maybe you should have been there in the first place. So are we good to go ahead and ratify this first proposition?
I am good with it. Folks, perfect. Let us know in the comment section. It's live, and I know we got 2 people watching, so if you want to comment, let us know what you think. By all means, comment, let us know. Next one.
So subpoint A, and this is just an extension. So we'll ratify the propositions, and each of them have subpoints. Whatever, if we get to a point that the subpoints don't get ratified, then you just stick with the propositions at face value. So the subpoint addendum, if you will, to this is that they may serve at the local community level after they're done. So say you have someone like, I can't imagine he would want to do this. Most politicians who reach what might be considered the pinnacle of presidency don't. Right. But if Obama wanted to go back and serve at his state that he's in right now, right? He was from Illinois. I forget exactly where he's at now, but it could only be at the community level. So it can't even be the state representative level. He would have to be kicked down to like the very local level, local as in like you could serve on, school boards, you can serve on your county board, but you cannot do state. You cannot be even like a state representative.
Yeah, I like that still. Because, if they want to serve their community, then by all means, who am I to say they can't? But I just don't want, I think that was the original compromise we came up with as far as like, I didn't want them to like go back to like an executive power, for example, at a state level. And I think that's how we came up with like very small, like, local community to avoid that scenario of like special interest, I think. Conflict of interest, I think that was my main concern. And that's how we came up with that.
And I just added this because I know we talked about this and I had forgotten it when I wrote all of this up. But if I remember correctly, we had said if you go up early for presidency and you get it, your 20 years is automatically capped and it's as if you serve that 20 years. Did we still want to keep that in there?
Yes.
Okay.
Because you went as high as you can go.
Yes. Okay, perfect. So that allows for some strategy. We're not going to be able to prevent all of the gaming of the system. There will be people who find workarounds, but we're looking for improvement here as a baseline. So that brings us to Proposition 2. For Congress, you will limit U.S. Congress salary to $30,000 annually. And we can look for exact numbers, but when we did that original episodes, and I'm sure with inflation, it's not going to be enough now, but it was basically what our service members were averaging when they come in, not at the officer level, but just at like your basic recruit. And our reasoning behind this was that they don't need to be making, really, it's not supposed to be a glamorous thing. It's supposed to be a service, and we're hoping that that reiterates that. Still okay with that, Ken?
Yes, because if you look at the subsections there, we make up for by the states could subsidize the cost of living for their senators or representatives. The people will vote every 10 years to raise the lower of the starting salary of U.S. Congress, and states may hold special elections of the salary to increase/decrease of the representatives. It must be a true popular vote in that state, and all Congress members will not receive a pension after they retire. So I think, that kind of like balances itself out.
I agree. So we'll take those one at a time. Sub A, states are responsible to subsidize the cost of living for the U.S. senators and representatives. So one of the gridlocks that Ken and I got into, and I think it was the first or second episode, I was concerned that if you do $30,000, and especially if they're living in D.C., that's barely going to rent out your apartment for the year. So what we're doing is we're putting it on the state. So if you are a U.S. senator from the state of Kentucky, Kentucky decides how much they want to subsidize or how they're going to be supported. And I'm sure that they can get creative with that. But what your tax dollars will go towards federally will not exceed $30,000 per senator or representative, and it's blanket regardless of where they're from or where they're living. Because here's the other reality of the situation. It's become more popular for, average Joes like us to work remotely and like live outside of the expensive areas and then drive into a place like Nashville, right? And I have no problem with that, but the senators are doing that and they keep raising it to where they're like, we need 175,000 annually. Sometimes they're nice and honest in that bill and they say because we want it, but other times they're arguing for like cost of living, but then they don't live in DC. And then they're never in session. And like we're making it so that they cannot raise that themselves. Congress is no longer responsible for self-raising. So are you still good with sub A, that the states are responsible to subsidize?
Yes.
Perfect. And then sub B is that the people vote every 10 years to raise or lower the starting salary. So remember that 30,000 is starting, which means that that's before their subsidies. All of them are paid the same, regardless of seniority or tenure, how long they've been there. But let's say 20 years from now, they continue to drive up inflation with terrible policies. And so 30,000 is no longer even within the ballpark, right? Just like whatever they had back in the day wouldn't have been good enough. We can, and I think you had mentioned like the Census Bureau, we can like pull data from that, but it's not just going to automatically increase. It will be a national vote, like a true population referendum vote, whether they want you to raise it, but they can also lower it. That's the other thing. You can adjust for cost of living, but if they continue to be problematic and the people as a whole want to downsize, they could do it. So are you still good with B?
Yeah, because I think my gridlock with that originally as well was like, at least with that idea, it put in the conscience of Congress essentially to say like, okay, we got to do our job at least.
Yep.
We can't just get away with passing a bunch of bloated stuff and give ourselves raises on top of that when it's going against the will of the people. So at least this gives it back to the will of the people as far as their salaries is concerned.
Right. So what about sub C then, which is states may hold special elections on the salary increase or decrease of the representatives and must be a true popular vote in the state. So that's going to be your, states hold elections. A lot of people don't know that because we tend to only care about the presidential election, unfortunately. But the states will allow the people to vote as they do, just like they do on amendments and propositions in their states, how much they want to increase or decrease the salary of the representative that they have sent for the state or for the districts for the House of Representatives. They can choose how much to subsidize, and that will go for every member. So you'll have, well, it'll be 2 senators for every state, but it will also vary depending on how many districts and such they have, but they'll do that. And I would say just one slate at a time. So collectively, or we could do it individually. You have a preference?
I think I like what we have already.
Okay.
So I don't see the need to change for that personally.
Okay. So subpoint D, all Congress members will not receive a pension after they retire. I think all of the United States said yes.
Yep.
You still good with that one, Ken?
I'm more than okay with that one.
Okay. There is no reason for them, in my opinion, to be receiving 80%, 60% of their salary having served, let's say, I think it's as little as like 1 term for Senate. So if they serve 6 years, then I believe they are eligible for like 60% of their salary. I haven't checked the latest rules, but it's just kind of insane in my opinion. And we do deal with, I think it's one of
Mhm.
the last propositions. We will, if you were worried about them investing in stocks and things like that, don't worry, we're about to rip that out of their hands as well.
Oh
Proposition 3,
yeah.
all bills must be read out loud from the floor before a vote. So if you want to propose a bill, you have to read it word for word from the floor before it's ever even allowed to go to a bill. So when these or to a vote. So when these come out of committee, they have to be read in their entirety. I think that my hope with this was that it will make them smaller bills. It will reinforce single issue bills, which we'll get into in a second. But it will also make it so they stop trying to trick people with their jargon and language and boring legal stuff. It should, in theory, be the minimum amount necessary to make it the law that it needs to be.
Yes.
Okay. Proposition 4, bills must be relevant to the issue at hand, aka they have to be single issue bills. You will not get the omnibus package where you have to sign off on sending $40 billion to Ukraine on top of everything else if you wanted something else in that bill package. It has to be single issue. Now, that's not to say that senators and representatives can't negotiate with each other and say, hey, if you vote on my bill, I'll vote on yours. But they're not allowed to just stack them together and be able to try and do that because originally it used to be close to single issue. You could do like addendums and things like that. However, it then started getting to the point that it was no longer the good faith negotiating, like, hey, I'll put mine forth and you put your fourth and we vote together. It was instead, or at least the way it's executed now, is we tend to just have a bunch of things and they say, yeah, if you want to know what's in the bill, you got to pass it. Most recently, if you were paying attention, I think it was the House of Representatives, no, Senate, said that they were given literally 3 hours to read like a 2,700 page bill. It's not physically possible. And they do that a lot. It's just that people have been speaking out a little bit more in the age of social media. So we're trying to block that.
I am still in favor of that.
Okay, good. Now, this was an important, in my opinion, addendum. So sub A is going to be single issue bills can include issues for funding because it's not limited by required to be a single issue bill in these states, but a lot of times, like California recently passed a bill that said they're going to do something with, I think it was like housing, but they didn't include the funding for that. So they passed this platitude going up into the election cycle so that the people
Yeah.
in the Senate and House in California, in the state portion, legislator,
Mhm.
could say, oh, we did something for you homeless people. Now, if you want that to come through, you have to vote for us again so we can vote for the funding. And it's a really crummy way for them to basically hold the American people hostage or for people to do like virtue signaling or just to completely crush a bill. So what I'm allowing for in this proposal is that you can include your funding for whatever it is, but it can only be a single issue. So if you want to do something for housing, you can only have funding for housing. You can't also include funding for Congress. Like it has to be a single issue.
Keep that.
Okay. Proposition 5, a minimum of 1 week must be allowed between the reading and then the vote. So once you've
Yep.
read it on the floor, you need at least a week. I don't care. Some of them will be shorter. They don't need a week. Some of them will be longer and they can negotiate them amongst themselves, but they need at least a week's notice with the bill in their hands for them to be able to vote on it.
And for me, one of the reasons why I kept that or brought that up was so they could at least go back to their districts and talk to their constituents and pretty much get the voice of the people before they went ahead and vote. And plus, it would avoid a scenario where they try to cram through a bill late at night in the middle of the night when everyone's asleep. At least with this proposition or sub proposition, I should say, that forces Congress to not only actually take the time to see if that's a vote they want to actually go ahead and vote nay or yay for, but also, again, just avoids that scenario where they're still accountable to the people and actually have to take the time to read the bill itself.
In the negotiating for the House Speaker, Republicans also raised an important issue that I hadn't really thought about. I didn't know this wasn't a thing. The House has not been allowing for votes to do amendments from the floor. So they haven't allowed floor amendments, which means that on the floor, I can say, hey, I will vote for this so long as we allow for this amendment. And in parliamentary procedures, you propose an amendment, and then there's a whole round of voting on that amendment. First, there's a vote to consider the amendment, then a vote on the amendment. And they're just like, to hell with all parliamentary procedures that they're supposed to be doing. So they're just like, no, you vote for it as is or it dies. And a lot of the reason they're doing this is because they're weaponizing it for political press leading up to the election. Do you want me to add something really quick here that they have to allow for floor amendments?
Of course.
Okay. Allow for floor amendments. Okay. So that'll be sub A. We're passing Prop 5, right? Minimum 1 week.
Yep.
We'll pass sub A, allow for floor amendments, and then sub B, I would say an additional week for each round of amendments. So they should pass all the amendments at one time, but I think that they need time to at least read the amendments if they're not going to be simple enough. So an additional week. They can do less if they want. I don't care. That's fine. But for the entire bill, it needs to have at least a week.
All right, this is my favorite.
Prop 6, no exceptions for roll call. You must be at least virtually present. We live in a virtual day and age. Congress proved that they can convene virtually. So there's no excuse for someone to not be present. Now, you are allowed to abstain from a vote if you want to do that. But when there is a roll call, they call roll. You can't just let a symbolic vote go through. That is where every member of the House or the Senate, whoever's called it, has to vote. They either vote yay, nay, or abstain. One of the three. They have to be present. And so we're saying that they can't basically not do their job. So there is no exception for that. Now, sub A for that, we ratify that. There should be a discipline action for failing to make roll. We can kick that to a committee to figure out what that would be. But we can allow, do we want to allow any excused absences? Say someone's sick, their kid has the flu, whatever.
Do we want to leave? Do we want to kick that out? You said.
Well, do we want to ratify that and allow for excused absences or not? Okay. Now, the reason I allow that is because I teach and I give my students excused absences. University policy is they get a week's.
They're not college students, right?
I know. However, that disciplinary action could even be fleshed out to be like they don't get paid or it's docked or something like that. But like, I don't know. So Prop 7, then Congress doesn't get paid if they shut down. We see a lot of threats of government shutdown, and for some reason they still get back pay for that, even though they caused the issue and they have all of this money to take care of themselves. So they have no fire under their butt to need to, make the concessions or hash things out. They just let it go. And so meanwhile, people who are not in the upper 1% don't have the ability to be paid for however long it drags on, either because they don't have the ability or they just don't have the emergency fund, whatever their reasoning. I think that we need to put Congress in the same position as the people that they are screwing over. So they don't get paid if they shut down.
We're trying to end the scenario of rules for thee, but not for me. So go ahead.
All right. The sub A to that is going to be there's no benefits either, which means they lose access to everything. They're not going to be able to be doing any trading or investments of any kind.
No more special treatment.
Later, we make an exception for a blind trust for them to be able to invest, but they will not be able to do anything with that. They will lose all of their benefits. The veterans, if they can, you probably could speak to this better than I can, but my understanding is you are only covered as either a veteran or a military service in government facilities. And then if those shut down, you don't get access. Is that?
That's fair to say. Yeah.
Somewhat access. If that's going to be the case, and that's my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong. But they're also not going to have access. They don't get to go and take their money outside of the healthcare that they're supposed to have access to. So we're restricting them. This is to try and make sure that they don't try to prolong as a strategy. You go with that one?
Yep.
Okay. Prop 8, the House and Senate that caused the shutdown will be immediately recalled. So if you do not reach a compromise of any kind, right? Because that's what government is supposed to be. It's not supposed to be cudgeling the other side into your will. It's supposed to be if you have a bare majority, then you have to work with the other side, or stop proposing radical legislation, or stop, holding people hostage with, I won't vote, like we saw with the Democrats in the Senate. I won't vote for the budget if you don't vote for this. Like, there's a lot of political pawning that affects real people's lives. So if they cause a shutdown, they're immediately done. They are immediately recalled.
Yeah, I think that was kind of. I think we were originally joking at first, so we'll come with like the iron fist down and everything like that. But I mean, if it helps Congress like put in their conscience to actually do their job, then I'm all for it. Keep that.
What I'm hoping that this will do is it will prevent them from using the strategy of, we're just going to withhold the votes we need until you vote for X policy that we want that's not popular enough to get by. I'm not saying that you
Right.
can't negotiate, but I'm saying that you better get those votes through faster so you don't screw over the people that elected you, or else you're done, because we'll put people in there who will represent us. Because
Yeah.
what I saw happening is, a lot of times Congress does not, they try to extend beyond the majority that they have. If you don't have enough to drastically change current policy, don't try to do that, and don't get a hold up. Like, I think it'll make them think twice.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. Sub A for this
there we go.
is going to be that if they're recalled, so they caused the shutdown, then they can't be reelected to any federal positions. Like, they can't rerun, they can't do any of that. You might even extend to a state if you want, but this says federal position, and they can't be appointed. So you can't have this stupid, slimy revolving door where it's like, oh, well, now they're going to be appointed to like X presidential cabinet. Like, they've disqualified themselves by being of a disservice to the people.
Yep, keep that.
Okay. So by federal position, I'm specifically thinking like U.S. Senate, U.S. House. If the
Yes, that's what we're talking about.
If the people want to directly elect you to like your state stuff, whatever, that's their choice. But you can't serve the federal stuff and cause a federal shutdown again.
Yep, keep it.
And keep in mind that this is also only for federal, so states can do their own stuff. If California House causes a shutdown, it doesn't affect Kentucky, it doesn't affect Florida. That's their business. Subpoint B here, a special election will be held during the shutdown, basically to fill those. So guess what? Government, I'm sure some people are like, oh no, Ryan, the government won't be able to do anything. They weren't going to do anything anyway. And they shut down sometime. What was it, 180 days under Obama? Something like that. So hold an immediate emergency election, fill those seats. Honestly, we averted the crisis faster. That's my thought process there. So thoughts on subpoint B?
Yep, keep that.
Okay. Subpoint C, states are responsible for replacing sitting senators. So we'll get to this later down this list, but we're basically making it to where the state senators are no longer elected by popular vote. They're appointed by the state. We're repealing the 17th Amendment. So the provision here is that the state legislators that we elect, so Tennessee State House, Kentucky State House, if Kentucky Senate, U.S. Senator helps cause the shutdown, then they're going to be replaced. So, and I think that the way that was worded, if you were involved in that Congress at all, you're removed. It doesn't matter if I was going to help or not. Like, it's an all or nothing package. So every state would then be proposing all of their members. So we good with that one?
Yes.
Okay. Subpoint D, the people of the fire districts will replace sitting representatives. So if it's the House that causes it, issues like that, then they'll do the immediate election that we usually do for replacing or electing a House member.
Yep, keep that.
Okay. Proposition 9, state House can impeach U.S. House, same for Senate. So let's say, so let's say that the Kentucky U.S. Senator, Mitch McConnell, right? He's not doing his job. He does something that's a problem. Then what will happen is the Kentucky State Senate can impeach him, right? So you elect your state senators, which I forget how many there are. I think it varies by state, but they can basically pull back those 2 representatives to the U.S. Because remember, we're a representative democracy.
Yeah.
which means that it's supposed to be like a tiered cake that goes up and up and up till we reach the federal level. So it's supposed to be we elect the state senators and the state representatives directly, and then we still directly elect uh, the House members at the U.S. level, but the U.S. Senate is supposed to be appointed by those people that we elected at the state level to go forward. So those interchanging between the two have the ability to impeach each other.
Yep, because like someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, let's say like she does something that's impeachable offense and everything like that. The House Representatives, like the state legislators in Georgia, like their representatives, can make a vote based on her performance or the fact that maybe she violated her oath, for example. They can vote to remove her from office and then have a special election after that.
Yep. Are we good with that possibility? We'll get into the specifics
Yep.
with the subpoints. Okay, good. So the subpoint A here is going to be that the legislator will do the impeaching, right? Just like we see with the president. If you didn't know this, the just because the president is impeached does not mean they're removed from office. For the president, the House impeaches or doesn't, and then the Senate votes to remove them from office or not. So, for example, both Bill Clinton and also Trump were impeached, but they were not removed from office. So just because the legislators can impeach the U.S. representatives doesn't mean they're removed from office. If they're impeached, let's say, then the people are going to vote through a recall whether or not to remove them, which means that whether it's for the House or the Senate, the people still get a say. So it's not just because what I might be worried about is a state governor who helps appoint the slates who elect the U.S. senators might find some way to play political games to where they're like, all right, I'm the opposite party coming in now, and I want to remove the U.S., so I'm going to use. So, for example, I'm trying to think of a state where this is true. I think so. Kentucky is blue or is red at the national level. We have a blue governor right now. So, for example, if the state Senate flips to blue, they can't recall Mitch McConnell just along party lines. They can impeach him if they want to, but the people still get a say. So we're kind of letting the people check the power of your representatives there. So they impeach, we vote. Are we good with that one?
Yep.
Okay. So if there is an impeachment, then the process for that is we hold an immediate special election. I misspoke.
Let's skip that.
Immediate special. Okay, so that leads us to Proposition 10. Infringing on the Constitution is grounds for the state legislator to impeach and the people to remove. So, for example, we had the state of New York, and they're the reason that the Bruin decision came down. They had what was ruled by the Supreme Court to be an unconstitutional infringement on the Second Amendment. They were not allowing, in a nutshell, people to have concealed carry permits. They are a may issue instead of a shall issue state, meaning that just because you can legally carry to defend yourself does not mean that the state has to allow you to. And so in New York, you basically have to know a politician to be able to defend yourself. You really have to defend yourself to be able to defend yourself. So you need to make a case and gets approved and all of that. And there were these two gentlemen who were supposed to be able to get legally, and they were denied. So the U.S. Supreme Court said that is unconstitutional. So, for example, all of the people who signed off on that bill, because the Supreme Court deemed it unconstitutional, can be recalled. Now, is New York going to recall them? Probably not, but they could, and we want to give the people that option. Are we good with that?
Yep.
Okay. If your law goes before the Supreme Court, you are automatically eligible for recall, even if it's not overturned. So let's say someone challenges your law at they try to challenge it, but the Supreme Court won't hear it. So let's say that there's a law and along party lines, they want it overturned. However, based off the way the bench is, they won't hear it. They're not going to rule on it. You can still try to have them impeached. Are we good with that?
Yes.
Okay. There was a provision that I forgot to add here. Before I go to the trouble of doing that, let's make sure we still want this. Do we want to leave that, again, like before, the process to be it must be the state legislators who impeach, or can we go directly to the people if they want and get 3/4?
I say let's do. I think we agreed on the 3/4.
Okay, so there can be a petition for a 3. Okay, so just like you have checks and balances with presidency and Congress and all of that, let's say in Kentucky, there's a bunch of people who are in cahoots and they're not going to impeach those senators, those representatives, what have you. The people can vote to do so if they want.
Yep.
And the reason behind the 3/4 is that is the most majority we possibly ask for, right? Like we usually just have a 2/3, right? Because we don't want a bare majority. We want more than that, demonstrating the quote unquote will of the people. Anything that's a radical change, like overhauling of the Constitution, that needs 3/4. So we're setting a high bar, but still making it possible. Is it going to happen? No, but I'd like it to be available.
Yeah, it's an option.
Okay. Prop 11: states can send their own can set their own parameters whether a state rep can be impeached, but that representative cannot run for a federal office or be appointed for 2 presidential cycles. Ken, remind me where our mind was at with this one. I feel like we talked about we wanted the states to decide whether state representatives were impeached.
I think the original thought process with that was let's say they did get impeached, but let's say after that happened, the people essentially like they broke that trust from the people, and because they broke that trust, they shouldn't be able to like hold any political office or cabinet position for at least a certain time period to where like we remove from remove that conflict of interest. So that's why I think we came up with like remove 2 presidential cycles before they can go ahead and run for federal office again or be appointed.
We used the specific language there of being impeached. So were we saying that kind of like Trump, let's say Trump had been impeached as like a state legislator. If he had been impeached, regardless of whether or not he was removed from office, he would be ineligible to run for 2 presidential cycles. Is that correct for the state or for the US House?
For the Congress, yeah.
Okay, so that doesn't even take them to be required from office. But let's say Mitch McConnell from Kentucky gets impeached. He'll finish out his term if he's not removed from office, but he can't run again for 2 presidential cycles. Is that where we were at?
Yes.
Okay, good. I like that. Man, we were really smart, Ken. We thought of everything.
I was going to say, we were really gutted Congress. 15 propositions.
We gutted them on purpose. Can you tell we were a little bitter at Congress?
A little bit. And that leads to the repeal of the 17th Amendment, because the original thought process was the original idea with the state legislators appointing the senators at the federal level and being the House representatives being a true popular vote within that state, was the House was going to be more like the House and Senate are supposed to be like a balance between like state representation versus federal interests, if not. And that's with the Senate. The Senate was more like that. They're supposed to protect essentially the state's interests, whereas the House of Representatives is more interested in national interests and is supposed to be kind of create this balance between the two. But obviously the 17th Amendment ended that, and it was a true popular vote. And so we're saying that we need that check and power again, and we need to repeal the 17th Amendment. It was a mistake. Do we want to keep that?
Shockingly, yes, because Ken, when you originally came to this with me and I had to look it up, I was like, I don't know that I like this. But I will say that the reason for that is it takes a mindset shift. And you really have to go back to the arguments of the founding fathers, which, again, I will continue to say this. Like, say what you will about them, agree, disagree with where they were at. They were very smart in fixing what they saw as the major issues of the day. The monarchy, even with democracies, like they don't last as long because it allows for bare majority rule, or you just get a lot of gridlock like you do in Parliament in England or Canada. So for all of their weaknesses, there is a strength to this, and you need to understand, like you just mentioned, Ken, that the senators were not supposed to represent us. It was the House. The Senate was supposed to represent the interest of the state, which still represents us indirectly because we voted for the congressional members at the state level, the governor, and the House members and the Senate members at the state level who would appoint them. So it was kind of like the electoral college for a senator. But instead of being nationwide, it was just statewide, and it would be all, if I remember correctly, it was all of the state representatives, all of your all of your Senate members, all of your House members in your state, plus the governor would go with that.
Yep.
And it's fascinating because part of the reason for that, right? If the Senate confirms the Supreme Court justices, those are supposed to be the things that the state governors and the states themselves would have the most issue with, right? Because they're supposed to, if the president hands down what would be challenged as an unconstitutional mandate, and let's say the Supreme Court, whether or not that gets upheld or struck down, and then the states have to subsequently decide, do we locally not enforce this, or what do we do here? That conflict is about to come down. They were then supposed to be confirming the check on the president. Like, it's very well thought out as to what those checks were supposed to be. I always knew, just from grade school and stuff, about the 3 checks, the 3 branches. I never known until we did this, the reasoning and how deep the checks wind up going just from state interest and personal interest. So the reason we're wanting to repeal the 17th Amendment is to kick it back to where states' interests are balanced with people, and it will, in theory, push the people to be more vested in their local elections, because that was another reason they did it, was you're supposed to, give a care about the governor race, about the state races, and not be like, oh my God, we're electing a king every 8 years. Fate of the world is swinging back and forth. Federal government is supposed to be very limited. So that's kind of where we were coming at from this.
No, we wanted the original intent was for the regular Joe or Jane to be mainly concerned with state, local politics, not be concerned about the federal level. The federal level is more to protect national defense, provide security from domestic or foreign enemies. That's where you have the military come in. But as far as everything else, that was kind of more like a state level issue.
Yep.
And by repealing the 17th Amendment, that forces that to happen again.
Yep. So I'm good with it. And here's kind of the details of that. Sub A, legislators elected by the people at the state level get to elect the U.S. Senate.
Yep.
Okay. Sub B, they can only elect people who have been elected to the state legislature.
Yep.
I'm trying to remember, what exactly do we mean by...
because originally, one of the reasons why the 17th Amendment got put in place to begin with is because states were coming up with pretty much bypassing originally.
That's right.
And so the state level, they're starting to just go ahead and do popular vote, and they didn't even they weren't even appointed by the state legislators anymore. So this pretty much fixes that scenario and avoids that scenario again, where we have a state level pretty much try to bypass actually having to serve the state legislator first, and then they can get appointed and become U.S. senator.
So at that point, then it's kind of like Kamala Harris being moved up from a senator to the vice president. You have to be serving in one area to be moved up to the other. Now, did she have to do that? No, but we're fixing that for this to move up to. Okay, that's right. I am definitely on board with that, because again, this boils back down to, did you do did you pay your dues, serve your time with your community, right? Instead of just, I'm going to be senator so that I get my name out there, and then I'm going to be as confrontational as possible on media, etc., so that I can, make my bid for presidency. It is now going to be, I did my service and I got in there. Never know, there could be potentially hundreds, depending on how big your state is, right, of those representatives, and you might never go up, but you had to serve to get there. So yeah, I'm 100% on board with that. I think that was you, Ken, because that wasn't me. I like that.
That was me.
Kudos to you, my friend. Sub C, the House of Representatives will still be the populist vote. We're not changing that. We're just trying to balance this.
Yep, trying to reinforce that.
Okay. Prop 13, Congress and relatives of Congress cannot buy or trade stock. Period. The end.
Yep.
Nancy Pelosi cannot. For all the people who are opposed to straw sales of weapons, they sure as hell do not care about straw sales of trade secrets when it comes to stocks. Oh, yeah, Nancy's husband can't get a tip off and then suddenly invest. So we said immediate family, and I think we said even to cousins, etc. So like if your third cousin gets elected, it's not going to affect you. But anyone in the immediate family tree, while they are in Congress, cannot buy or trade stocks.
Yep, I am down for that.
The exception to this in sub A is going to be they may invest in a blind trust, meaning all of Congress pools their money. And then just like you might invest in, let's say, like a mutual fund, which is diversified, instead of you picking specific stocks, because there's people who want to invest. They should invest and they should be able to, just because they're serving shouldn't preclude them from doing so. But they don't get to say, guess what? I'm going to invest in Pfizer and then I'm going to, make legislation that bumps those numbers. We're trying to remove that.
Yep.
Okay. Prop 14. If you start as a lobbyist, you cannot run for public office in the future. So you can go from public office to lobbying for a cause that you, whether for money or because you actually care about it, are going to defend, but you cannot move from the big money of lobbying. We're trying to get them out of the pockets of the lobbyists.
Yes, because right now there's pretty much like a revolving door where you could serve as Congress, become a lobbyist, and then you could gain some connections with other people, and then those people can help you get back into Congress. Then all of a sudden you're in Congress, and now you have these connections from the lobbying world, which creates conflict of interest. And at that point, it starts to be a scenario where they start serving their lobbyists and their donors. We're trying to avoid that scenario. So if you become a lobbyist, once you are done with Congress, like that's it, you're done. Or actually, what was Proposition 15? I think that's where we get into like the second portion of that.
Yeah. Are we going to ratify Prop 14?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So then Prop 15 is if a company loses a lawsuit, then you lose your right to lobby on behalf of that issue for 10 years. So I think where we were coming with that is, I don't know, big oil loses a lawsuit for something, then the senators cannot lobby on behalf of them. Is that what it was, like on the Senate floor?
Yeah, but for some reason I remember like we said we were going to come back to it because then you have the whole issue with like the First Amendment or something like that, right?
Yeah. Yep. So
do we want is that going to be like the one of those ones where we want to go ahead and like toss out?
All right, that's what. Look at that. We evolve. So I'm not gonna. So we are not gonna do Prop 15. So just and again, maybe we, this is not a never situation. But here's the other thing: we're just trying to reboot the system, and try to enshrine the things that we thought were really good and preclude the things that are not. This is one of those gray areas where I'm like, we really might, but if it's going to infringe on free speech. Yeah, I do remember that now. So we'll skip that. Anything we missed on the Senate? I think that was not that.
I was going to say we were pretty thorough with Congress. Finally got through Congress.
That's our longest one. So,
yep. Taylor DeLuna says amen to Proposition 3, where the person has to read everything. So, thank you, honey. Probably going to go beyond 9:30 tonight, just so you know. So, that's my girlfriend, by the way. So,
what's up?
So, anyways, yeah, probably gonna go beyond 9:30. Sorry, honey. Anyways, the judicial branch. That's like the shortest one.
we left most of that.
Yeah.
Feel free to add anything at the end if I missed it. But Prop 1 is constitutional amendment setting the Supreme Court to exactly 9 justices. I'm tired of people threatening to pack the Supreme Court. I'm tired of people threatening to reduce it. I think that 9 is fine. We had a whole discussion about court packing. Listen to that episode, but 9 prevents at least that from becoming a political issue. I'm good with that.
Yep.
Okay.
We wanted to avoid the scenario of packing the court.
Prop 2, you enshrine the lifetime appointment. Now that will obviously exclude if someone has an impeachable offense. That's fine. Yep. But outside of that, they're going to serve for life, and that will be set as a constitutional amendment as well. I think that already is. I'm trying to.
Yeah, it is already. It's already in the Constitution. It's a life appointment.
Well, whatever we need to do to make sure that doesn't get sidetracked.
Yep, that's fine. We can keep that.
Okay.
Now,
anything
you want to add? The president is like the next one we kind of gutted as well because it's become like a king. We gutted
the executive portion.
We did. So like the first one, first part is like we are maintaining the Electoral College.
We're not abolishing it, but we're going to get to tweaks as the last thing, which will come right after that.
Yep. And so the proposition one, executive order. That's like, so again, y'all can check this out on really a lot of these propositions were based on my Substack article, so you can check that out. But when it came to like the executive order, my main concern was like trying to come up with like the nature of an executive order, because really there was like no guidelines in the Constitution. And so that's why you've seen the increase of power where now when you have a president, it's like an elected monarch at this point. So we wanted to really curtail the power of the executive order. And so as Proposition 1 states, executive order is limited to clarifying an existing law passed by Congress already signed into law. So in other words, let's take DACA, for example. There is no law to actually allow undocumented immigrants to go ahead and stay here and apply for citizenship or, give them a visa. That Obama bypassed Congress. And so we're trying to avoid that kind of scenario where it has to be a law that's already passed in Congress. It's only a clarification law or an enforcement of a law. And it's going to keep that.
Again, yes, and I agree. Again, the thing here is whether or not you like the ends, the means matter. And that allows for the president to be a monarch. And we don't want that. So if people really care about that issue and support that issue, stop hoping that the president will just bypass however close the margins were between the presidential races and start focusing on changing your local branches. And it's a gradual change, right? So the idea here is not to make change impossible, but you cannot just disregard the laws that exist that went through due process. So that's where that came from.
Yep.
The not necessarily exceptions, but we said that the president may allocate existing budgets in subpoint A. So say, for example, there's a discretionary fund for like national security. The president, if they're allowed to do so, we're not going to strip that away from them. I actually really didn't dig into all of the laws since the executive orders have been so broad, but we're allowing them to allocate things. So for example, if I'm not mistaken, the Pfizer vaccine from when it was the Trump presidency, he allocated those funds for warp speed through executive order, in part because it was a national or global emergency. So we're not restricting that, but that's because we already allocated the funds through the budget for healthcare portions, and he chooses where that goes. But you can't just say, I'm going to now raise taxes on people to eradicate student debt. Those are two different things.
Yep.
I think my ADHD kicked in here because I just said the president may. Was there anything you wanted to add, anything for subpoint B to that? Otherwise, I forgot my train of thought.
Go ahead and delete that for now. If something pops up, I'll let you know.
Perfect. Okay, so that leads us to Prop 2. The president cannot authorize proxy wars. Great example of this. Obama bombing the hell out of Libya. Cannot happen as a proxy war. You need to actually go through the appropriate channels. It's not that he shouldn't be able to act within the means, but that was definitely bordering, if not explicitly passing over the lines when the president is allowed actually to send troops in, but he was like, oh, I'm not sending troops in. I'm just sending drones. Like you can't do that. Now, actually, I'll get to the exceptions in a second. Are you good with that?
Yeah, because also one of the other things I was concerned about was like, we haven't had a declaration of war since World War II.
Yeah.
And so like, for example, the Iraq War, very controversial war, where it was technically not even a war by technicality definitions, but it was definitely, it looked like a war, it felt like a war. It was a war. Yeah. And so we're trying to avoid a scenario where the president just bypasses Congress and actually forces Congress to do their job again too, right? So it kind of gives that power and responsibility back to Congress as far as, is this something we want to do? Is this something we actually want to get ourselves involved in?
Yes, agreed. So Prop 2 passes, which brings us to Sub A. A president can give orders on existing acts of war. So, for example, I guess technically we weren't at war. However, Osama bin Laden, right? It took 2 presidencies for us to find him. The president doesn't have to wait for, the strike permission. He can execute that. And Congress can actually delegate, I think we said, as much power to the president for, the executive, again, to clarify, troop movements, what have you, but Congress has to transfer that power. The president can't just do it.
Yep. And once that order is complete, power goes back to Congress.
Okay. Sub B further clarifies what I mentioned about movement of troops. The president may order specific movements of troops for the defense of the U.S. with unilateral action. I don't know if that was already a thing or not, but we were like, let's make sure that that's a thing. So let's say we were to, it doesn't even need to have troops on the ground on the shores of the U.S. It could be the threat of one. Like, we're in technologically advanced day and age. If Russia's sending a missile, the president can do whatever he needs to unilaterally because it's a national emergency that we are being threatened, but we're trying to limit just shipping off people in proxy wars.
Yes, keep that.
Okay.
Now this is something, because we had a guest for the executive order portion.
Yeah,
and AK, yeah. And so one of the things I took issue with the executive orders is the game of ping pong. So take the border wall, for example, where Trump, put an executive order to build a wall and fund the wall. And then Joe Biden comes in and he's like, nope, not anymore. But the irony is that with Trump's executive order, it was actually an enforcement of an already existing law. And so we're trying to avoid a scenario where if there's a law that's already in place and the previous president already made an executive order to enforce it, next president who has a different agenda can't just come in and say, well, I don't like, this law, so I'm just not going to go ahead and enforce it. But AK took the issue or liked the idea that once a new president came in, there was an opportunity for a reboot. And so this proposition was kind of like especially when you get to the subsections, it's kind of like us coming up to a compromise as far as, we avoid the game of ping pong, but at the same time, we want to give the new president a chance to go ahead, put his own agenda in there as well. And, if he doesn't like a certain executive order, the way it's being conducted, he can change it still.
Yep. And that leads us to Prop 3. Executive orders expire at the end of the 4-year term.
Yep.
Okay. So, Ken, like you said, fresh start, but also the example I gave for that one was that you had Biden who comes in and is like, oh, I am, doing this action on capping the price of insulin. Well, Trump had already done that. He just reversed it to then, go ahead and revive it and then pass it off as political gain. So what we're doing is it ends. However, the president can choose to renew, which is what sub A deals with, a new or returning president. So if I was elected a president, all my executive orders expire at the end of that 4-year term, but I can elect to renew all or just some of them for my second term. If I don't, then they just expire and it reverts back. Remember, they're clarifying the law, so it goes back to whatever the previous interpretation or like actual text of the bill, law, whatever it was.
Yep. Let's keep that.
Okay. Sub B, Congress must vote to make the executive order a permanent part of the law within 6 months. Now, what we meant, what we meant by that is, let's say we're like, hey, this is really good that we've capped insulin. Congress can do their damn job and make it a law. But if they don't, if they vote no, and again, it should be a roll call vote where everyone has to vote yay, nay, or abstain.
Yep.
Then it just goes back and it goes away. But I didn't want it to be this situation where it has to be through executive order. Congress, do your job, vote on it. And I set a 6-month clock because there are dockets and there are legislative sessions, blah, blah, blah. But if there's an executive order, as soon as it's signed, it needs to go to Congress. And Congress will immediately indicate not only where they stand on it, but where, quote unquote, the will of the people is. Right. So when I say quote unquote, because there are times that people put someone in office on the pretense that they will do something and they don't. So Congress has to, say yay or nay.
Yep.
Okay. Subpoint C, if Congress votes to not uphold the executive order, then it expires at the end of the term. If they do not uphold the executive order, the law is amended to reflect the executive order. Or if they do uphold it. So it's an either or. Okay.
Yep.
Subpoint D, if an executive order is overturned by Congress, then they, meaning the president, will automatically be impeached. So there are impeachable offenses that the House can bring and the Senate can choose. Now, here's the thing. When we did this, Joe Biden was in the thralls of "I don't care," and it actually says, this is
Yeah.
not me attributing to him. He had said he had done at that point he had done the eviction moratorium and said even though he didn't technically have the power to do so, he said by the time it's overturned, I will have done what he thought was good for the people. Now, regardless of how you felt about people's rent being stayed for an indefinite amount of time, whether or not you thought that was good or bad, it highlighted that a president can basically say, I don't give a shit, and I'm going to do what I want. So if the president does something like that and it is overturned by the Supreme Court, they are impeached immediately. They're not removed from office, but they're done. There is no, oh, let's hope the House can do this. And the reason that I wanted this in there was so that a president doesn't just fly in the face of the people because the system of justice moves slowly and he or she is given due process through the courts. So if it reaches there, they're impeached.
Yep, I agree with that. And then I brought up the next point where we bring it back to the people for a vote because there's no official recall vote when it comes to the presidential election. At some in states that have a recall vote, like California had a recall vote, but on a federal level, when it comes to the presidency, there's an actual recall effort. There's no recall effort, excuse me. So this is actually, a basis for a recall effort, like when the Supreme Court rules an executive order by the U.S. president, sitting U.S. president, is declared unconstitutional. Not only are they immediately impeached, but it goes back to the people for a recall vote, and it has. But we also don't want to make it to like a simple majority. So we want to make a super majority. So it's 3/4 of the states essentially have to vote to actually remove the president and have a new election after that.
And that's a true popular vote.
Yeah.
So that would mean just like if there's going to be a constitutional amendment, it has to be ratified. Like you have to call for it by 3/4 of the state, and then 3/4 of the people, if I'm remembering correctly off the top of my head, have to ratify it. 3/4 of the people. So that is supposed to make it so that the president is automatically checked if they do something that's been ruled unconstitutional. But let's say that it's, people might say, oh, that was politically active, right? Like the Supreme Court overturned it just so they could get rid of the president, or they did it and that was the consequence. The people can decide now, like Ken had mentioned, whether or not we want to remove them from office. So checks and balances. I'm good with it.
Yep.
Okay. And that ends the presidency. Anything that we missed?
Nope. I couldn't figure out your ADHD moment, so I think I'm good.
All right. That brings us to the Electoral College. Ken, you want to take these?
Sure. So the Electoral College. So obviously for me, one of the differences between Ryan and I when it came to, what happened in 2020 election cycle, I think there was more serious voter fraud situations that occurred that night than Ryan. Not to say that Ryan doesn't believe in voter fraud allegations, didn't believe in any of them, but I think they're more severe. And so I really took issue with like the electoral process, the election process. So these next two sections, we'll just go ahead and hammer down real quick when it comes to the electoral process and also the election process. So the first point we have is when it comes to the Electoral College, right? Because we both agree that we need to keep the Electoral College, but I personally believed that there were still issues with the Electoral College that need to be addressed. And so these were my original proposals that I think Ryan and I both agreed. I don't think there was much disagreement from what I remember, but maybe Ryan will have a refreshed memory. So we'll see. But the first point here is every precinct will be granted points based on the popular vote. The amount of points will be based on the population within each precinct. So essentially what I'm trying to do with these changes with the Electoral College is create a Electoral College within the state. So the true popular vote within the state is gone at that point and is now based on precincts. So let's say a precinct in California, in LA County, for example, because of a higher population, they pretty much drown out the votes of like rural California. So the whole point of these ideas is essentially like give the little guy more of a voice. And so let's say for that example, let's say the precinct itself. So let's say LA goes blue, right? So the popular vote still matters, but only within that precinct, essentially. So if the majority of the people in LA County voted blue, then LA, the state electors will be granted a certain amount of points based on the population of that precinct. So LA County, let's say 10 points. And then like the smaller counties, they would get 2 points each. And then based on the cumulative points they get for the entire state, that's the direction the state will award the presidential candidate towards. So let's say Donald Trump, I think I have it on here for 99 points. So let's say like 51 points, ends up that California has like 51 points for Donald Trump. Then that state now, the electors now will have to vote based on the point system they have, and now they're going to be voting Donald Trump instead of Joe Biden. So first point, every precinct will be granted points based on the popular vote. The amount of points will be based on the population within each precinct. Ryan, any issues with that?
I'm trying to make sure that I understand this because if I don't understand it, then I can't have for or against. So Nashville, let's say, right? Tennessee tends to go red. Nashville tends to go blue. Or you could even take Minnesota. Minnesota tends to go red with the exception of Duluth and Minneapolis. So You're saying that the state will be totaled at 99 electoral points towards the Electoral College? So every state contributes the exact same?
No.
That's where I'm lost.
Okay, so as far as like the amount of electors that each state is granted, that's still in there.
That stays the same, okay?
That stays the same. But I'm saying like how they get those electors is based on a 99-point system within the state.
Okay, so if Tennessee, so the state will determine how many points each of their sectors is worth.
Yes.
Okay. So what happens then if, let's say, Minnesota wants to give the majority of the points to Duluth and to Minneapolis? Like, let's say they give like 85% of the points to those between those two cities, and then the rest of the counties get what's left. So it's effectively the same situation we were at. Then
whoever gets the majority of the points, those are the electors that the candidate is rewarded to.
So if in Nashville, Nashville, let's say they can, the whole state has to divide 99 points among all of their counties?
Yes.
Okay. So then let's say they give Nashville like 20 points, and then all of the other counties each get 1. Like, let's just pretend that there's like, I don't know, math. Then if all of the other counties go red and Nashville goes blue, how many electoral points from the state electoral college go towards the candidate?
Doesn't Tennessee have 11 electors?
I don't know.
But pretty much whatever, like the original, if it's like 11, then the 11 will go to the candidate based on the majority of the points, the candidate got.
So it's still all or nothing.
Yes, but it's except instead of like a true popular vote, because essentially my issue is like, let's say a state like Illinois, for example, in their precinct, the rural parts of the smaller precincts in Illinois, they get drowned out by the precinct of Chicago. And so essentially, like, we're trying to create a electoral college within the state system itself. So it's all or nothing within the precinct. But like I said, once that precinct decides the majority based on the popular vote within the precinct, whatever they get in that precinct, that's where the points get awarded to. And so let's say Chicago's area gets 15 points, right? And all the other areas surrounding gets 2 points. Whoever gets the majority of those points in that 99-point system, I think Illinois has 21 electors. Whoever gets the majority of them, if Donald Trump or Joe Biden gets the majority of those points, then the 21, 25 electors in Illinois gets rewarded to Joe Biden at that point.
Okay, so let's see, 99 divided by 2. So as long as you get 50 of the points in a state, you get the electoral votes from that state. So if you get 50 points in Tennessee, you get 11 electoral votes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just the majority.
Well, so it seems to kind of be the same, though. It just seems like popular vote with extra steps. In the words of Rick and Morty. Like, I was trying to think, especially on the note that, like, won't the state, because the state decides how their points are divided out, right?
Yeah.
So then in theory, like, if a state tends to go red or tends to go blue, and they're the ones who are in power, then they can just kind of almost not gerrymander because it's not by district then, but it would be like, oh yeah, my, the city that favors me gets the most points, so they get to dole it out, right?
Because, well, the original idea was that, because one of the issues with the Electoral College, the way it's set up right now, is that the candidates only focus on the swing states.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you actually create a system within the Electoral College, like the point system I have, it forces the candidates to actually go visit all 50 states, because essentially every state is now a swing state. They can't take a single state for granted. Not only that, but now they can no longer just appease like the extreme bases of their party. They have to like try to actually meet more in the middle towards the independents in order to gain those votes. And so, like, for example, Joe Biden can't just, go for the, blue urban areas anymore. Like, he actually has to appeal to like the rural parts of the state of Kentucky, for example, or or California. Like, he can't just take for granted like those voters anymore. Like, he has to actually go out and to those places in order to win their vote. And same with the Republican candidate. Like, they can't just take a Donald Trump or whatever Republican candidate can't take a state like Texas for granted, because that state is also up for grabs, because now the total popular vote no longer exist to where like the big cities in these states can drown out the surrounding smaller precincts around them. Because that's the issue with like a state like California, when you have like pretty much LA deciding for the rest of the state when the majority of the state is red, or New York as well, or Illinois, those states.
So the argument for that, and why those drown them out, is because they would say that it's the people who are voting, right, not the farmland. And I do understand what you're saying as far as like, in rural portions of West Virginia or Pennsylvania, even though there are more people in certain areas, there are vested interests in like farmland type things, especially like in the Midwest, right? To where you don't want to overlook those, but there are fewer people to vote for those. So I do understand where you're coming from that. However, the other side of that coin is going to be that it is the people are voting because of the people who are represented. What would be your response to that? Because like, I feel like steering into this, the pushback would be, well, good, yeah, they should drown it out because there's more people and the people are what's represented. How would you push back against that for this policy?
I push back with the policy that I don't think it's fair that let's say, for example, let's go back to the original idea of the Electoral College, where you had the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan, where the original idea of the Electoral College was essentially like they didn't want the states with the bigger populations to drown out the little states in their population. And that was the whole idea. And that's why we don't have the total true popular vote in America. And so I don't see why we can't apply that same principle within the state system, within the state, for a federal election anyway.
I think that it'll really depend on the state, like whether or not you would actually see this shift, right? Because like, especially if the states get to determine how this is done, which I do think that they should decide, then like some states it might make a difference, some states it might not. So I mean, to me, it's kind of a horse apiece, as the Midwest says. 6 one way, half a dozen the other. I don't know that it will drastically change it, but like, I don't really see a major issue with it, especially because the states are deciding, and you're still getting the people to be represented, and you're trying to balance. So if I understood you correctly, it's not a drastic shift. So I mean, I'd agree to it.
Do you just want to get rid of it?
No, I'm fine with it. I don't know. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I wasn't quite understanding.
Maybe this could be one of those issues where we'll kick the can down the road.
You can walk me through. Tell you what, walk me through the rest of these, and we'll see if it clears it up.
Okay, so every precinct will be granted points based on the popular vote. The amount of points will be based on the population size within each precinct. The points from the precinct will count towards the electors from the state. The candidate with the most points within the state shall be awarded the electors from the state. States shall have the right to legislate a formula to establish the point-based system based on population in the precinct, but points must equal to 99. States shall reserve the right to determine their own election process for local and state elections. These amendments only concern the federal process. Anything not covered in these amendments will be subject to Article 10.
Yeah. So I don't really, it doesn't bother me one way or the other. Do you want to ratify these, or do you want to kick it down the road, more deliberation?
Let's kick it down the road.
Okay, we'll kick it down the road. We'll do election integrity.
Yes. So depending whether or not you agree serious voter fraud occurred on 2020 election night, I think the majority of Americans can probably get behind all this, especially with the allegations that occurred and some of the confirmed stories. So the first point proposal I had here was every state shall practice use it or lose it. Procedures for federal elections to ensure the voter registration presents an accurate reflection of the state population. States have the discretion on the application of this requirement. So, I can have my mother on a voter roll who passed away 10 years ago, and somehow she's still a registered voter. So that's the whole point of use it or lose it. After a certain amount of time, they have to pretty much, if they want to vote again, like if you haven't been active in the election process for a while, you have to actually take the responsibility and go out and vote and register to vote again.
I don't have a problem with the requirement for people to, after a certain amount of time elapses, you need to re-enroll. I mean, you do that with driver's license to begin with, right?
Yep.
So what do we want to set, or do we want to set at least a federal minimum standard? Like states can adjust it, but did you have in mind any specific amount of time that we would need as a federal baseline?
They have to at least have it done 6 months prior to the federal election.
Okay. So let's see. We'll put this as sub. Must be registered 6 months. I'm fine with sub A. So for prop A here, prop 1, did you have 6 months registered? That's fine. I think that will encourage people to get out ahead of time and keep on top of things.
Yep.
So use it or lose it. So let's say I don't vote for one election cycle. Am I automatically purged? Do I need to do it every time? Is it multiple?
That's the state's discretion on the application for that requirement.
Okay. If you don't set a minimum, some states might say you don't, it's.
Well, let's go through the other points
once every 20.
And see if I covered that already.
Sure. So I'm good with, you must be registered 6 months prior. Let's see, what's that? You want to take the one after that?
Yeah, every state shall impose a proper vetting system of identification with a minimum requirement of a photo identification card.
Okay, and that's left to the state's discretion, but the national standard is going to be they have to have a photo ID.
Yep.
Okay, no problem there. Next one.
Every state shall practice in-person voting, making limited exceptions for mail-in ballots to include citizens who are handicapped, military personnel, and first responders.
Uh, One question. There are students who live out of state. So like I did my PhD at NDSU. I was registered to vote in Tennessee. I was never going to make it, especially for like local elections. So can you make an exception for people who are like out of town, etc.? They just have to request in advance.
Let's make that state's discretion.
Okay. So primarily mail-in voting. We'll add the sub. A states have discretion on exceptions/excuses.
Let's say no, because then like that could open up a can of worms as far as it's a crisis, so let's go ahead and like open up the mail-in. Let's go ahead and give everyone mail-in ballots now. So let's make it to where subsection. I guess we could just add to the proposition, but maybe add in there or out of town, like on the job travelers.
Job, school.
That's about it.
So if you are
well, medical reasons maybe too.
Job, school, medical. You kind of covered medical before that.
Handicapped.
Medical, immune compromised. That's both. Okay. Good on that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Next one.
Every state shall be prohibited from practicing election day voter registration.
So the idea behind that one is you will not allow then, if you weren't registered before election day, then
like
then you can't vote.
Yeah.
Okay. 6 months far out. I'm a procrastinator. Is that to allow the paperwork to process so everyone is like through by then, or what was the rationale for 6 months?
Just so you at least have the paperwork in. Like you could get your voter ID card, like I don't know, 2 months in advance, but you already submitted the paperwork at that point.
I don't have a problem with prohibiting same day voter registration. Next one.
Every state is prohibited from accepting new ballots after the national election day.
So I mailed my ballot. It's postmarked by election day. Does that count as a new ballot?
Post-election day? Yes.
No. So like, sorry, it's postmarked. So like I mailed it and it says that I put it in the mail the day of election. I had a valid excuse. It's going to get there after the election day.
That's going to be up to the citizen to better time management wise.
Okay. So they can't accept new ballots. So the process here then is just expediting how long it takes to count all of the votes.
Yep.
Okay. I don't really have a problem with that. Next one.
American citizens must take the initiative to register to vote.
That's pretty self-explanatory. I feel like that's enforced by the other ones.
Yeah. Only American citizens are eligible to register to vote.
That works for me. That does sound like it should be self-explanatory. However, there are states that do allow non-citizens to vote in elections. Now, they're supposed to be prohibited from voting in federal elections. However, Minnesota has received a very interesting case recently where you had someone go on testimony who says she's an illegal immigrant who is here. She says that illegal immigrants are voting, and that if the Minnesota representatives do not vote to allow them to vote in the federal election, then they're going to vote them out of the state. And the state has also recently ratified, if I remember correctly. I don't know if the governor signed it yet or not, but they allowed it to them to vote in local elections. So
that'd be taken away.
Yeah. Now, again, I will say I take it with a grain of salt because it is a girl giving a testimony, right? It doesn't mean that that is the case, and I didn't see her demonstrate evidence that is the case. However, it bothers me greatly that someone is that brazen that they basically are not supposed to, and they don't have legal standing, and they're threatening, by threatening, not physically, but threatening as in like, we will vote you out if you don't do what we want.
Yeah.
So I don't mind protecting that. AK with the Black Republican, Black Democrat podcast, he does a lot because he's from Minnesota. He does a lot covering of the local things, and he's another great one. So we'll give him a plug there because he actually has all the details both on his TikTok and Instagram for that.
Yep. And then finally,
can I add one thing before that?
Sure.
I would like, because I prefer photo ID and other things to be necessary. However, I also prefer that those be accessible. So I would like for people, like states, to provide voter ID cards. Like, it doesn't have to be a driver's license to vote because not everybody drives. But if we're going to make it this restricted in order to stave off the potential for people to not be able to vote who can, and they've done everything else that they can, whether it be financial or what have you, I would like for them to have voter ID cards that count as their stuff. And you can have all the rules for what they need. It can be as stringent as, getting your driver's license, right, where I need to provide my birth certificate, proof of citizenship, whatever. But just to make sure that they have the ID that matches it.
Sure.
Okay. States will provide free voter ID.
Upon registration.
On registration. Do you need it to register?
I mean, you have to at least take the initiative to want to register to vote to begin with. You can't just be given a voter ID card.
Sure. So upon application to register to vote. Okay. Last thing you said, all subjects not covered are subject to Article 10. For those that don't know, supremacy clause, so anything that is not specifically delegated to the federal government is left to the states. And as I've gone through the last couple of years, I've realized we approved this one, didn't we? Sorry. How important it is, because the founding fathers did not outline everything, nor are we, right? Like, we didn't touch Second Amendment. Like, we didn't touch a lot of things that, we're leaving. And there was actually this great debate between should the Bill of Rights even be included, because what the founding fathers who were opposed to the Bill of Rights were worried about has come to fruition. At the time, at least the vast majority, if not all, who didn't vote in favor of the Bill of Rights, it's not that they didn't want those to be rights. It's that their concern was that it would create a list of things that you are guaranteed as rights and everything else has to be given to you by the government, when they believed that those rights are automatically granted to you in spite of the government. That's why they're inalienable rights. And I never knew that before really having to embark down this journey. So I've learned a lot as I've had to prep for these. But it should not be that you are given these rights by the government. It should not be that states are given the right by the federal government. It starts with you and then goes to the state level. And then lastly, the very limited powers that are given to the federal government is what they're supposed to have.
Well, we finally made it through.
Woo! We did.
We really got the first three branches. The only one that didn't get gutted was the Supreme Court. That was it.
Yep, pretty much.
So, do you have any final thoughts, Ryan, before we close that out?
No, I'm looking forward to talking about the three-letter mafia, the different executive branches in the future. But I think that we made some solid groundwork on this. I had fun. It's a very interesting approach. I'm happy you proposed this to me and that you let me come on board with it. I had a great time. So thanks for having me on. Yeah, folks, first and foremost, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the share button as well with your friends and family members. Also, go ahead and hit the share button, like button, and subscribe on Between the Liars and my channel as well at Taboo Topic if you haven't done so already. Folks, it's been a blast being on this journey with y'all for the first three branches of government. Really, I've learned a lot myself, especially how the
how thorough the founding fathers were when it came to creating our Constitution, how they thought of a lot of potential abuses of power, and they came up with that check. Obviously, and the thing is, like, some of the things we added in there, it was something that they also discussed at the time, but they decided they didn't need to do that for that time period. And for that time period, it probably made sense. Well, I shouldn't say probably. It did make sense for them to go ahead and ratify the Constitution as was, despite like some maybe the concerns of the Anti-Federalists, which as time has progressed, the concerns of the Anti-Federalists have become has come into fruition. And so it's time to address those concerns. And really, I've just I feel like it's a lot healthier, just kind of like, instead of just sit there and complain all the time, to actually come up with like proposed alternative solutions to our problem. So, folks, with that said, that's all I have to say for this evening. So I hope you all have a great and wonderful evening. Ryan, you want to take it away?
Yeah. All right. Remember, you can find Between the Liars and Taboo Topic on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Twitch, and Google Podcasts. And you can follow us on our social medias to stay updated at Kenjin_Express and at Between the Liars. And if you enjoy this show, we would appreciate a 5-star review, especially on like Apple, Spotify, and share us with your friends. Subscribe to our channels. Can't say that enough. So important. We say it twice. And we will catch you back here next time. Help us envision a smaller, better, more accountable government. And that starts with a blueprint. Goodbye for now.